I am Sarah Miller, a 22-year-old nurse at Boston General Hospital, and today I need to make sure my stepmother and father don't come back to my house. They're currently on their honeymoon with Diana's daughters, leaving me behind without a word. While this might seem like typical family drama, there's more to the story. I am the legal owner of this beautiful colonial house in suburban Boston, inherited from my mother who passed away last year. The house holds so many memories. I inherited it from my mom when she suddenly passed away from a stroke at 47. Looking back, though the pain has dulled, I can still feel the weight of her absence. My parents divorced when I was 7, and I spent my childhood splitting time between them, half the month with Dad and half with Mom. I was always closer to her. She just got me in a way Dad never did. He was 50 then, constantly wrapped up in his work at the investment firm or dating various women. I learned early on that I wasn't his priority, but it didn't hurt as much because I had Mom. Things changed when I turned 18 and started nursing school. Dad took a position in Houston, which meant our already distant relationship became limited to holiday visits. Then 2 years ago, he brought Diana Walker, his 38-year-old girlfriend at the time, to our Christmas dinner. She came with her 2 daughters, Emily, 18, and Sophie, 16, from her previous relationship with her high school boyfriend. They'd never married, but had separated about 7 years before she started dating my father. I remember feeling surprised. Dad had never brought any girlfriend to family gatherings before. But we welcomed them warmly, doing our best to make them feel comfortable. The evening went surprisingly well, and I genuinely thought we all connected. Even after that night, whenever Dad called, Diana would get on the phone too, always sweet and interested in my nursing studies. Her daughters were quieter, more reserved, but there was no tension. Just the awkwardness you'd expect from teenagers meeting potential step-family. After Mom's death, I discovered she had been more prepared than any of us knew. She had updated her will around my 18th birthday, always the planner, even when it came to difficult subjects like mortality. With my recent graduation from nursing school, I decided to move into the house and find work locally. The familiar walls and Mom's carefully tended garden offered comfort I desperately needed while adjusting to life as a new nurse. Dad's reaction to the inheritance wasn't what I expected. Both he and Diana were supportive during the funeral, but I could sense his disappointment when he realized the house wouldn't revert to him. This was the home my parents bought as newlyweds, but Mom kept it in the divorce settlement instead of claiming alimony. It was fair. She had sacrificed her own career in physical therapy to raise me, allowing Dad to climb the corporate ladder. The house was her security, and now it was mine. I think the arrangement was more than fair. Mom rebuilt her life with help from my grandparents and made sure I never felt the financial strain. She managed both roles, provider and nurturer, beautifully. When Dad showed his frustration about the house, I was too deep in grief to care. Besides, Mom had left him all their wedding jewelry and his gifts to her. In my mind, that should have been enough. After the funeral, Dad and Diana returned to Houston, leaving me to establish my routine as a nurse and homeowner. But 6 months ago, everything shifted when Dad called with news of their engagement. He explained they wanted to have the wedding here, in his hometown, and suggested they stay at my house during the preparations. It made sense, he argued, given the spare rooms and the fact that Diana homeschooled her daughters. I agreed for several reasons. My night shifts at the hospital often left me feeling isolated, and Diana had always been kind during our previous interactions. The promise that Dad would share the household expenses while they stayed was also appealing. A nurse's starting salary only stretches so far, even with no mortgage to pay. They moved in about a month ago. Initially, it felt nice having a full house again. Coming home after long hospital shifts to the sounds of life, Sophie studying in the living room, Emily helping Diana with dinner preparations, Dad watching TV in his old favorite chair. Made me feel less alone. I started thinking I could get used to this new family dynamic. In fact, I dreaded the day they'd leave, imagining returning to empty rooms and quiet evenings. Then 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the wedding, Dad pulled me aside after my evening shift. His proposal caught me completely off guard. He wanted them all to live here permanently. He explained that this month-long stay had been a test run, a way to ease me into the idea of being part of a larger family again. He claimed he worried about me living alone in this big house, especially with my irregular nursing schedule. My immediate instinct was to say yes. The loneliness after losing Mom had been crushing, and having people around did make the house feel more alive. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of Dad's reaction to the inheritance, or perhaps my nursing training kicking in, teaching me to look beyond surface presentations. While sharing the house might seem like a logical solution to my solitude, rushing into a permanent arrangement felt risky. So despite my heart's pull toward having a family again, I told him I needed time to think. It wasn't an emotional decision. Like triaging patients, I needed to assess all aspects of the situation carefully. I promised to give him my answer after the wedding. He tried to hide his disappointment, but I could see it in his expression. The same look he'd had when he learned about Mom's will. 10 days ago, they had their wedding in the garden, the same spot where my parents had once celebrated their own ceremony, according to the old photos Mom kept. Everything went smoothly, and they were supposed to stay a few more days before returning to Houston. I was preparing to give them my carefully considered answer about the living arrangement. But then everything changed. 2 days after the wedding, I came home from my night shift at the hospital to find the house completely empty. Their belongings were still scattered around. Diana's designer perfume in the bathroom, the girls' textbooks on the dining table, Dad's favorite coffee mug in the kitchen, but they were gone. I tried calling everyone repeatedly between catching short naps, my nurse's instinct telling me something wasn't right. Hours passed without any response, my anxiety growing with each unanswered call. Finally, around noon, Diana answered. Her casual tone made my blood run cold. "Oh, Sarah. We're all on our honeymoon. We'll be back in a week." I sat down at the kitchen counter, still in my scrubs from work, trying to process this information. "Why didn't anyone tell me you were leaving?" I asked, keeping my voice professional. The same tone I use with difficult patients. "We forgot to mention it," Diana replied dismissively. "Don't worry about anything, sweetie. We'll be back before you know it." My nursing training has taught me to stay calm in stressful situations, but this was testing my limits. "That's not the point," I explained. "Leaving without any notice, or even a goodbye, is just. It's disrespectful." I asked to speak with my father, but Diana's sweet facade suddenly cracked. "Your father is busy," she snapped. "He doesn't have time to talk right now." Maintaining my professional composure, I said I'd wait for him to call when he had time. That's when Diana's true colors emerged. The transformation was as dramatic as watching a patient's vital signs suddenly crash. Her voice turned cold and harsh. "Listen here, Sarah. Your father has a new family now. Stop acting like a child just because we left you behind. When we get back, I expect this house to be spotless. And stop bothering us with your neediness." The call ended abruptly, leaving me sitting in my childhood kitchen, still in my wrinkled scrubs, feeling like I'd just witnessed a critical patient showing their true symptoms. All my instincts as both a nurse and a daughter were screaming that something was very wrong. I decided not to call my father. My professional training had taught me to trust my gut when situations felt off. Thank goodness I hadn't agreed to their permanent living arrangement before seeing this side of my new stepmother. With the same decisiveness I use in emergency situations at work, I gathered all their belongings, packing them into cardboard boxes, with about as much care as they'd shown for my feelings. I placed everything out in the yard, ready for their return. Yesterday they returned from their honeymoon. Thankfully, I was working a 12-hour shift at the hospital when they discovered their belongings in the yard. I had already changed the locks, treating this like a necessary medical intervention. Sometimes immediate action is required to prevent further damage. My father's angry call came during my lunch break. "You're being a spoiled child," he shouted through the phone. "Leaving you at home wasn't worth getting this upset about. We didn't do anything wrong." With the same calm I use when dealing with agitated patients, I replied, "Take your boxes and leave. If you're still on my property when I get home from my shift, I'm calling the police." He hurled a few insults before hanging up, but I had patients waiting and couldn't waste energy on his tantrum. After my shift ended at midnight, I drove home to find the boxes gone. I thought that would be the end of it, but around 2 a.m., my phone lit up with Dad's number, timing as inconsiderate as when he'd schedule his visits during my exam periods in nursing school. "Diana has something to say to you," he announced. Her voice came on, sugary sweet again. "Sarah, I'm so sorry for how I spoke to you. I want a second chance to make things right. We shouldn't let something so small come between us." Drawing from years of dealing with manipulative situations, both at home and in the hospital, I cut her off. "Save your fake apologies. I'm not naive enough to miss why you're suddenly playing happy families now that you can't live in my house. A genuine apology, I've learned from my work, comes immediately after the mistake, not when you need something." My father's voice returned, heavy with fake emotion. "You're heartless for not letting us live with you," he said. "I'll share all the bills. I just want to be in this house because it reminds me of your mother. Julia had a bad day. Even the girls miss you. We can start over." But like monitoring a patient's vitals, I'd been watching the signs for years. Dad had been eyeing this house since the divorce, and now that he'd seen Diana's true nature, he was desperate. "No," I told him firmly. "You can't come back. My decision is final." That's when he broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, a performance worthy of my more dramatic patients. He accused me of being the most selfish daughter ever, for not letting him live in the house where he'd spent the happiest days of his life. According to him, I was being petty and cruel over a simple disagreement and not being included in their honeymoon. The ultimate low blow came when he claimed my mom would hate this ugly side of me. Looking back at the comments on my original post, they weren't quite what I expected. Some were unnecessarily harsh, but I understand the points people were trying to make. As a nurse, I've learned to take criticism professionally and extract the useful parts. I've stood firm in my decision. My father, like certain patients who refuse to acknowledge their part in their condition, simply hasn't earned another chance. The brief period when they lived here was pleasant enough. Both he and Diana initially displayed the warmth of a supportive family unit. But like symptoms that worsen under observation, their true nature emerged after I requested time to consider their permanent stay. Their behavior reminds me of patients who become aggressive when they don't get what they want immediately. Instead of respecting my boundaries, they attempted to bully their way into my home. After 3 years of nursing training and 1 year on the job, I've learned that solitude is preferable to toxic relationships. Their reaction to the house inheritance should have been my first warning sign, like monitoring early symptoms that indicate a larger problem. I now realize how materialistic and selfish people can become when property is involved. Recent developments have revealed a more serious condition than initially diagnosed. My father wasn't taking a break from his job as claimed. He was fired months before the wedding. He had been surviving on his savings, which, though substantial, were rapidly depleting after funding an extravagant wedding and honeymoon. The truth came out when he finally confessed to Diana that they couldn't return to Houston. His finances couldn't support their rent there. Diana, who had quit her job to be a housewife after meeting my dad, couldn't help either. They had been banking on moving in with me, treating my house like their emergency room. This explained Diana's delayed apology. It wasn't remorse, but desperation. Today, Dad contacted me again, pleading for just a few days, until he could find work. Like a patient seeking quick fixes, rather than addressing root causes, he failed to acknowledge how his poor planning led to this situation. As I've learned in my profession, enabling destructive behavior never leads to healing. Today marked what I hope is the final chapter in this situation. My father and Diana decided to leave Boston, but true to form, they couldn't depart without a dramatic finale. After 3 weeks of silence, they both sent texts announcing their exciting news. Diana's ex-boyfriend had offered to sponsor their return home and provide housing, having suddenly realized he needed to reconnect with his daughters. As a nurse, I'm trained to read between the lines of what patients tell me. The reality was clear. Diana's ex, who had maintained child support but remained distant from his daughters, had finally stepped up. He'd waited to see if they could sort out their situation independently, but when their attempts failed, he intervened, probably prompted by Diana's particular brand of persuasion that I'd witnessed firsthand. They didn't share these details directly, but their social media post, featuring their daughters with Lucky Clover stickers, told enough of the story. I don't fully understand why Diana's ex would fund everyone's tickets, but having experienced her manipulative abilities personally, I can make an educated guess. Today, during my lunch break at the hospital, I received yet another call from my father. After months of ignored messages across every possible platform, I finally answered, more out of professional curiosity than anything else. His news was both surprising and somehow predictable. Diana had decided to reconcile with her ex, the same man who had financed their return. I could hear the shock and sadness in my father's voice as he asked for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild our relationship. But like a patient who only seeks help after hitting rock bottom, his timing felt opportunistic rather than genuine. My years of nursing have taught me about patterns of behavior. They rarely change without serious intervention and genuine desire for improvement. Working in healthcare has shown me that sometimes the hardest part of healing is maintaining boundaries. While I still experience moments of loneliness between hospital shifts, I've learned to reach out to my colleagues and friends instead of seeking comfort in toxic relationships. The empty house sometimes echoes with memories, but it's a peaceful kind of quiet now. My nursing career, this house, and my independence. These are the foundations my mother helped me build. At 22, I have what many of my peers don't: a stable career, my own home, and the wisdom to know when to let go. When difficult moments arise, I remember the strength my mother showed in rebuilding her life, and I know I'm following in her footsteps.